So I've mentioned before in other videos that I've gotten a little more active on Twitter in particular. And I've tried to take the approach of mostly, I'll tweet some original content in some of these videos and things, but what I really spend most of the time on is asking questions of, kind of in the comment section of other people's posts. Typically people that are somewhat high profile public figures, politicians sometimes, or just journalists, etc. But not always, could be anybody. And I try and make them as genuine and as learning focused as possible, right? So when I ask these questions, I'm not asking them tongue in cheek. I'm not asking them to lead the witness or to try and trick or trap somebody. Most of the time, I'm sure I don't always deliver on, I know I don't always deliver on that, but my intention, at least my objective, is to do that, is to genuinely try and learn and probably to some extent get the other person or other people to also think a little bit, question themselves, maybe think at a level deeper than they might have been thinking, and hopefully, pressure test their logic a bit. And as I reflect on that, I think the objective is still a good one. I think a lot of social media, particularly Twitter, is filled with extreme voices, and that's what wins. That's what gets followers. That's what gets tweets. And there's all sorts of engineering and manipulation that goes on there too, and that gets a lot of tweets and likes as well. But even if you just kind of take the good faith stuff, it's the extreme voices, the people that are on there that are most likely to follow or like or retweet are looking for somebody that's speaking the language they're speaking, supporting the views they're supporting. And the more extreme, the more you do that, it seems to be, the more you get. So I think the idea of trying to be a presence on there, as others do as well, that brings some level-headedness, tries to keep the logic in the conversation, ask the questions to make sure, we're keeping the big picture in mind. I think that's a good thing. I think there's value in that. I try not to overstate the value, and I try and put it into perspective. I think right now, I want to say I have like 36 followers on Twitter, so I'm certainly in no way a needle mover or making a huge impact in that regard. But the way I like to think about it is, I get some interaction with people from time to time, even if there's a handful of people that are reading some of the questions and it makes them think, and they comment and we have a good back and forth, or even if they don't comment and I never know that they read it, but they did, there's benefit in that. Not to mention the fact that I'm learning from some of the responses. What's interesting is, today's an example, it still does happen where I will, ask a question or what have you, and typically this happens all the time in real life too. If it's kind of if it's a political thing and it's a right-leaning person's tweet and I post the questions, the assumption is immediately that I'm, a super far left liberal who's just trolling, trying to rile up trouble on this conservative or Republican person's, Twitter account, and vice versa. If it's a left-leaning person and I ask the question, it's automatically assumed that I'm some Trump supporter who's just trying to cause problems and, is blindly just supporting Trump. So that's always a little interesting to see. I try and keep my feed and profile, it's just genuine, but I think if people click through and look at it, they would recognize that's not the case, but most people don't. So I get a lot of that reaction. And with that, you get insults, which don't really bother me all that much. What I find bothers me the most is when my logic is challenged. Or not even that my logic is challenged, but when logic is challenged, I should say. That's always like a personal slight to me. Not that they're insulting my intelligence, but if you're being deliberately or directly illogical, that triggers me a little bit. There's also an authority piece. I've had a few people, which they probably do it intentionally, refer to me as kid or son or some sort of term that's meant to be a little bit, not derogatory, but like it's trying to put them in a position over me, and maybe condescending. And it's funny because those two things, the logic point and the kind of condescending point, the authority piece, those things still trigger me. When they happen, I feel it physically in me. I get a rush, I get a physical reaction, and I get this impulse that I have to reply right away. I've talked about it before. So I'm trying to do a better job of that. I'm trying to do a better job of controlling that and understanding how and when to respond to those types of comments, if at all. So still work to be done. But probably the biggest thing is, what I find myself questioning a lot about the accounts and the tweets and the people that I do comment on and question is I guess their logic, right? You are, in many cases, with the election getting closer, a lot of people are posting, whether it be ads or witty tweets or just views or whatever, that are trying to perpetuate what they believe, right? In many cases, it's either Trump needs to be gone at all costs, or it's Trump's the only thing that could save America. We need to have him reelected at all costs. I'm summarizing, but in general, a lot of the tweets are around those two premises. And I find myself, when I question those tweets, and oftentimes I'll get questioned on this eventually as it goes down the path, like, who are you to think you know better, right? Asking of me. And it's funny because I find myself thinking the same thing about the original poster, right? Or tweeter. Like, it's not that I necessarily disagree with what you're saying, but who are you to say it in such a declarative way, in such a certain way? Why do you think you have the right to do that? Why do you think this is good for the country, right? Even if you believe what you're saying is true, why do you think this is the best method to deliver the message? Do you think it's actually aligned to your objective? But again, I'll get a simpler, but usually some version of that question to me. And probably more times than not, my first inclination is to dismiss it, because I believe, like, hey, I'm doing this for a noble cause. I get it. But what I'm trying to do more of is to force myself to really face that question, because there is some truth to it. Sure, I'm not on there advocating for a particular political party or a set viewpoint, but in many ways I am advocating for belief or a view, which is, objective truth is the key, and let's not use extreme language, and let's try and understand the logic, and let's really question ourselves and our thinking. So, probably what I typically hang my hat on is the fact that if you're going to be sure about anything, that's what you should be sure about. It's the safest, it's the best thing. But to some extent, I am still acting sure. I am still trying to project my view of what right is onto other people. So I think it's a fair question that's being asked of me. And the challenge is, for me, I've used this phrase before, is to kind of break the set, right? If somebody's trying to distinguish between, am I just some blowhard who thinks he knows better and is trying to school people on how they should live or how they should think, how do you distinguish that from somebody who's doing what at least I'd like to think I'm doing, which is just trying to ask the right questions, not trying to convince anybody of anything other than that, be thorough in your thinking, whatever you come out, right? And to be thoughtful, to be aware that the biases and the blind spots exist. How do I break that set? How do I make it clear that I am doing the latter, not the former? And there's some things I try and do around that. Obviously I try and ask questions rather than make proclamations. When people give me good, thoughtful responses, I always thank them and say I appreciate the thoughtful response. Often I'll follow them to show, like, hey, if you're a free, open-minded thinker who's willing to engage in good conversation, then I want to hear what you have to say. I try and admit when I might be wrong. I try and admit when somebody makes a good point that's counter to me and teaches me something. I try to do all those things, and I believe they're genuine, but I'm certain there's still a ways to go. That reaction I talked about before, that rush of feeling that, I'm offended in some way, that probably suggests that I'm not there yet, that I'm still, in whatever way, still too emotionally connected to what I believe is right, and I'm not on there genuinely trying to learn and see the other perspectives and just find objective truth, whatever that is. Because if I was, it should be emotionless. I should be detached from it. It should be just the logic and the math, if you will, that tells the story. But I don't think I am there yet. I think it's important, as I continue to go through this, if I want to really understand the people that I'm questioning, there's no better use case to start with than myself, and really understand how I'm approaching it and why I'm posting the things I'm posting and why I feel so confident in them when I post them, that they make sense and that they're right. So probably more to come on this, but I think it's a good lesson for me as I'm going through this to check myself. And for myself even, I talk about breaking the set. If I do that in good faith, right, question myself in this way and check myself in this way, it at least helps to let me know that I'm moving in the right direction.